Barack Obama breaks down in tears after powerful words from Ibrahim Traoré. Everything changed after that. We dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of the month. Subscribe, leave a like, and be part of this dream too. It started with a letter, handwritten, sealed with a crimson mark, and delivered not through diplomatic channels but by a Burkinabe schoolgirl who flew to Chicago with her teacher. The recipient: Barack Obama. The message was short, almost poetic. Come see what they said could never be done. Come listen to the voice you once inspired. At first, Obama thought it was ceremonial. But then he saw the signature: Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, the young leader making waves across Africa for reclaiming the continent's dignity and wealth from the grip of global institutions. Obama placed the letter down and stared out his office window for a long time. Despite no formal press release, the trip was quietly arranged. Obama's team tried to insist on protocol, but Traoré declined. "Tell him to come as a man, not a former president," he said. "We'll walk, not sit." Obama respected that. He flew in on a modest aircraft, no motorcade, no flag-draped welcome. Only Traoré, standing at the airstrip with a firm gaze and open hand. The two men exchanged a silent nod, one shaped by years of diplomacy, the other forged in resistance. It was the meeting of two eras, not in opposition, but in reflection. They drove without an escort through Ouagadougou, past murals of Sankara, women carrying water, and children playing near fountains built from newly uncovered desert aquifers. "This wasn't always here," Traoré said, gesturing to a lush patch of green once part of the dry Sahel. "But it was always beneath us." Obama listened intently, absorbing the quiet pride in Traoré's voice. They passed no monuments, no military bases, only communities thriving on sovereignty, not aid. For Obama, who had witnessed Africa through the lens of U.S. policy and legacy, the shift was both humbling and profound. Later that evening, they arrived at a rural village where no speeches were scheduled, no cameras prepared. Just a fire, a gathering of elders, and one empty seat left open. Obama took it, sensing something sacred was about to unfold. Traoré remained standing, as did every child in the circle. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was intentional. Then, softly, an old woman began to speak. "They called us poor, but they drank our rivers. They called us wild, but they wore our gold. He reminded us who we are." She pointed at Traoré, then looked into Obama's eyes. "And now we want you to listen." As the old woman finished, a quiet stillness blanketed the circle. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on faces lined with generations of endurance. Obama nodded respectfully, waiting for someone to translate, but no one moved. Traoré leaned in gently. "She speaks Mossy. I won't translate. You must feel it, not interpret it." Obama nodded again, not fully understanding, but willing to absorb the emotion behind the words. The old woman continued, her voice rising and falling like a song older than nations. Though Obama couldn't decipher her language, her gaze pierced straight through him, as if speaking to something far deeper than memory. Traoré then addressed the gathering, but not as a president. His voice was soft, as if telling a bedtime story. "This is a man who once gave the world hope. We saw it on the TV inside a barbershop in Bobo Dioulasso. A black man with a name like ours, speaking to the world with grace. But when he left office, the world sighed, and Africa returned to whispers." He paused. "But we never blamed him. We knew the cage he was handed was gilded, not golden." Obama's eyes lowered. The words weren't accusatory, they were understanding. That hurt more. Traoré walked slowly behind him and placed something on Obama's lap, a folded cloth. Inside it, a stone. Not polished, not precious. Just a red rock from the Burkinabe soil. "This is from the well we dug when the West cut funding. The one your country's banks tried to block. But we used our hands." He smiled faintly. This stone has no market value. But it's everything we stand on. Obama picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. He hadn't expected such intimacy, such honest, vulnerable truth. No ceremony, just reality. The night deepened, and the stories continued. Tales of villages reborn, children returned from the brink, dreams reignited without dependency. Obama remained silent, his posture still, the stone clenched in one hand, the cloth in the other. No speech he'd ever written prepared him for this. For the first time in years, he felt less like a symbol and more like a student. The crowd never applauded. They didn't need to. They simply watched, waiting to see if the man who once symbolized change could now receive it. The next morning, the two men walked alone through a stretch of land once considered lifeless, now transformed. Obama marveled at how the earth, once parched and cracked, had given way to rows of millet, mango trees, and irrigation channels guided not by machines, but by villagers with ancestral knowledge. "We didn't just dig wells," Traoré said. "We remembered who we are." His words carried the weight of an entire continent's forgotten dreams. Obama remained quiet, his mind wrestling with a lifetime of policies, speeches, and compromises. In Washington, power was orchestrated. Here it was lived. They stopped at a modest structure, a community school built from reclaimed stone and clay. Children ran barefoot, laughing in 3 languages. Inside, chalkboards held equations in French, proverbs in Dioula, and a line that made Obama pause: "We are not what they measured. We are what we survived." A teacher greeted them, her face radiant. "We don't teach them to escape Africa," she said proudly. "We teach them to stay and build it." Obama smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. For years, he had preached upliftment through integration. But this was sovereignty, unfiltered and unapproved. Later that afternoon, as they rested in the shade, a young journalist approached for a brief interview. She asked Traoré, "What is the greatest threat to this new Africa?" Without hesitation, he replied, "When our heroes return, unsure if they still believe." Then he turned toward Obama. The air grew still. Obama wasn't offended, he understood. That single sentence held decades of hope, disillusionment, and possibility. It wasn't an accusation. It was a call. Traoré wasn't judging him. He was inviting him to remember, to re-engage, to recommit. That night, Obama found himself alone with a pen and notebook. He began to write, but not as a former president. As a father, a son of Kenya, a man who once believed change could be orchestrated from within systems that were never built for him. The words didn't come easily. But finally, he wrote one sentence, and underlined it twice. "The world doesn't need me to lead. It needs me to listen." He closed the notebook, placed the red stone on top of it, and stared at the stars above Burkina Faso. Stars that looked the same from Chicago, but now meant something entirely different. On the third day, Traoré invited Obama to a closed gathering. No press, no officials, only survivors. Men and women who had lived through coups, famine, sanctions, exile. They sat in a circle beneath a wide baobab tree, each with a single candle, each flame representing a loss. No introductions, no applause. One by one, they shared their stories. A man who had buried his son during a wheat embargo. A midwife who had to choose which baby to save during a medicine shortage. A former soldier who had refused to shoot farmers during a land dispute. It was not tragedy porn, it was truth unfiltered. Obama listened, his arms crossed, body still, but eyes flickering. When the final voice faded, a silence lingered long enough to feel holy. Traoré finally broke it, turning to Obama. "What did you see?" he asked. Obama opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. His hand instinctively reached for the red stone in his pocket. He held it tight, grounding himself. Then, without thinking, he whispered, "I saw the cost of decisions we called diplomacy." His voice cracked. The crowd said nothing. They didn't need to. In that moment, a man the world knew for composure let it fall, quietly, respectfully. A single tear slid down Obama's cheek. Then another. No sobbing. Just silence and salt. The tears of a man who had once stood before millions saying, "Yes, we can," now weeping not from defeat, but from recognition. Recognition of the complexity he once simplified, of the policies signed under pressure, of the lives touched and untouchable. It wasn't guilt. It was grief. Traoré, without fanfare, handed him a small bowl of water, from one of the aquifers they had reclaimed. "For washing the eyes," he said. "Not just the face." That evening, word spread, not through media, but mouths. Obama cried. Some said it was staged. Others said it was weakness. But in every village, something stirred. Because in Africa, a man who dares to weep in public is not a coward. He is a warrior who has seen too much and still chooses to feel. Children lit candles in their courtyards. Women sang old songs, not of war, but of return. And across the continent, the story whispered through the winds. He listened. The next day, Traoré offered Obama one final invitation, to speak. Not to the world, not to cameras, but to the youth of Burkina Faso. They gathered in an open amphitheater carved from red earth, barefoot, curious, unfiltered. There were no teleprompters, no aids, just a microphone and the man they'd once watched on cracked cell phone screens, framed as a symbol of progress far from their own soil. Now he stood before them, not as a legend, but as a man who had cried under a baobab tree, a man holding a red stone in his hand. Obama stood quietly at first. Then he spoke. "You were told I represented power," he began. "But power without memory becomes arrogance. And I forgot." The crowd didn't gasp. They leaned in. "I forgot that my father's land was once ruled without consent. That my rise didn't begin in Chicago, but in Kisumu, where my ancestors survived droughts, not debates." He held up the stone. "And I forgot that the ground beneath us is worth more than all the gold they ship away." A long pause. "Until this man reminded me." He pointed to Traoré, whose expression remained unreadable. Then Obama did something few expected. He stepped down from the stage and walked among the youth, handing the stone to a girl no older than 12. "You hold it now," he said. "And when they ask what you have in your hand, say, 'The future of Africa weighs exactly this much.'" The girl nodded without fear. Around her, a hush fell, not because they were told to be quiet, but because something sacred had just happened. A symbol had passed hands. And with it, a responsibility too great for politicians, but perfect for dreamers. Later that evening, under the same stars, Obama and Traoré sat alone once more. No translators. No plans. Just two men who had carried different burdens of blackness, one shaped by empire, the other by rebellion. "What now?" Obama asked. Traoré smiled faintly. "Now," he said, "you go back and speak like you did today. Not for us, but for them. The ones still asleep." Obama nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he felt no weight in his chest. Just clarity. And beside him, in the soft dirt, the imprint of a small hand still holding a stone. When Obama boarded the modest aircraft to return home, he wasn't the same man who had arrived. He carried no souvenirs, no declarations, no headlines. Just a torn notebook with smeared ink and an image he couldn't forget. A 12-year-old girl holding a stone like it was the heart of a continent. The flight crew, all African, treated him with respect, but not reverence. He appreciated that. For years he had been elevated beyond critique, beyond touch. But in Burkina Faso, he had been seen. Not as a leader, not as a legacy, but as a man capable of learning again. As the plane ascended into the clouds, he looked down at the red soil, now fading beneath layers of atmosphere. He thought of the well, of the old woman's voice, of Traoré's silence, and the echo of candles flickering without a word. He imagined that young girl standing by her village gate, repeating his words, not with awe, but with ownership. The future of Africa weighs exactly this much. His breath caught in his chest, because he knew what he had left behind wasn't just a gesture, it was a transfer of hope, of truth, of legacy redefined. In Washington, the reception was muted. No fanfare, no media frenzy. He requested no motorcade, only a quiet car. When asked by his team what to tell the press, he simply said, "Tell them I went to listen." They didn't understand, but they would. Over the next weeks, Obama began appearing in places unexpected: community centers, youth summits, universities in underserved neighborhoods. And he told a story not about himself, but about a man half his age leading a nation few Americans could locate on a map. A man who reminded him that blackness was not a color of compromise, but of courage. When he spoke now, his voice carried something new. Not ambition, not authority, but reverence. Reverence for the ancestors, for the silenced, for the unseen. Audiences noticed. Some wept. Others stood. Many said they had never seen him like this. And still, he never mentioned the moment he cried. He didn't have to. Because the transformation wasn't about what had happened in Burkina Faso. It was about who it happened to, and what that meant for every young black soul watching. The world had seen Obama rise. But now, it was witnessing something rarer: a man return to himself. 2 months later, Barack Obama was invited to speak at a global summit in Geneva. World leaders gathered, expecting the polished oratory that had once made him a global icon. His team had prepared talking points on climate, trade, and democracy. But as he stood backstage, he left the speech in his coat pocket. He didn't need it. What he carried instead was the sound of footsteps on red earth, the image of elders in silence, and the quiet strength of Ibrahim Traoré's presence. As he walked toward the podium, there was a shift in the room. The air changed. People leaned forward before he even spoke. He began not with a greeting, but a memory. In a village with no electricity, a woman once told me, "We are not what they measured. We are what we survived." The translators paused, unsure whether to reframe it for clarity. But the phrase needed no polish. It cut through the polished suits and diplomatic smiles like truth always does. Obama looked out at the room. "We built systems to define progress," he said, but forgot to ask who was forced to pay for it in silence. There was no applause, just stillness. A few nodded, a few squirmed. Then he did what no one expected. He mentioned Ibrahim Traoré by name. In Burkina Faso, a young man is not waiting for permission to lead. He is not asking institutions to validate his vision. He is building futures from what colonization tried to bury. And he is not alone. A ripple went through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Some diplomats exchanged glances. But Obama didn't flinch. If Africa rises, it won't be because we gave it aid. It'll be because we finally got out of its way. The words felt heavier than any treaty. Some officials left the room. Others sat back down, breathless. That night, the headlines were split. Obama praises radical leader. Former president goes off script. U.S. icon challenges global order. But in the villages of West Africa, no one read the news. They already knew. The girl with the red stone now kept it on her windowsill, reminding the younger children what a promise looks like. And in a palace with mud walls and solar panels, Ibrahim Traoré smiled as he watched the speech on an old laptop. He didn't say a word. He just closed the lid, leaned back and whispered. He listened. Back in Washington, the aftershocks of Obama's Geneva speech hit hard. Media outlets split along partisan lines, some praising his boldness, others accusing him of betrayal. Think tanks held emergency panels. Former allies grew quiet. Anonymous officials leaked concerns. But Obama didn't flinch. For the first time in years, he felt unshackled from expectation. He wasn't trying to protect a legacy anymore. He was redefining it. Still, the backlash grew. One morning, his aide rushed in with news. "They're accusing you of aligning with anti-Western radicals." Obama folded the newspaper, unimpressed. "Let them," he replied. "Truth has always been inconvenient." Meanwhile, Ibrahim Traoré was preparing for something bigger. After seeing Obama's speech, he invited African leaders to Ouagadougou for a private summit, not one funded or observed by foreign institutions, but one rooted in ancestral vision. No translators flown in, no Western advisors. Just leaders, seated on equal ground. The agenda? Economic sovereignty, ecological revival, and the reclamation of cultural identity. "We won't wait for permission to unite," Traoré said. "We'll do it like our rivers do, slowly, fiercely, and without borders." What began as a whisper in one country had now become a tide no dam could hold. In private, Obama and Traoré resumed their dialogue. This time, over secure calls, not of strategy, but of soul. "They're scared of what your words might inspire," Traoré said. Obama chuckled. "Good. Fear was always the beginning of change." The calls grew more frequent. They exchanged readings, Achebe, Baldwin, Sankara. They spoke of legacy, not as something to preserve, but something to earn. Traoré once told him, "You don't need to be Africa's voice. Just don't silence it." That line stayed with Obama more than any policy memo ever had. Eventually, Obama's own foundation shifted course. Quietly, grants began flowing toward African-led initiatives, projects once dismissed as too radical. A young girl in Senegal got funding for a solar library. A farmers' cooperative in Togo received land rights support. Nothing loud. Nothing branded. Just quiet corrections to decades of imbalance. And though few noticed at first, one thing was clear. A former president wasn't just giving speeches anymore. He was building, with humility, with hands open, guided by a younger man who reminded him of who they both had been before the world crowned them. The ripple effects were undeniable. From the Caribbean to the streets of Johannesburg, from youth forums in Accra to grassroots circles in Chicago's South Side, something shifted. Not because of a policy, not because of an election, but because the world had witnessed a moment where vulnerability met vision. Two black men, generations apart, standing not in opposition but in reflection. For the first time in decades, African youth felt seen, not as recipients, not as victims, but as architects of their destiny. And Obama's transformation had become a mirror. If he could change, so could the institutions around him. In Burkina Faso, Traoré launched the Red Stone Initiative, named after the very object Obama once held. Its mission was simple: restore what was stolen, revive what was erased, and reimagine what was possible. It was not a charity, but a challenge, asking every village to identify what colonialism had cost them and how they intended to rebuild. And they did. Elders began recording oral histories in digital archives. Women's cooperatives revived textiles older than any flag. Children learned not just in French, but in the languages of their ancestors. Across the continent, the sound of reclamation grew louder. Obama, too, changed his rhythm. He declined major interviews. Instead, he sat with high schoolers in the Bronx, with community leaders in Nairobi, with activists in Haiti. No cameras, no sound bites, only conversation. In one session, a teenager asked him, "What made you cry?" Obama paused, then answered, "Not what I saw, but what I forgot to see for so long." The teen didn't reply. He just nodded, as if understanding that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin when someone admits they were wrong, and then does something about it. World leaders took note. Some mocked, some feared, but others followed. A Latin American president cited Traoré in a UN speech. A Southeast Asian minister requested a meeting. Even within the European Union, murmurs grew, "What if we did listen?" But neither Obama nor Traoré chased validation. They didn't need headlines anymore. Their power wasn't in what they said, but in what they sparked. And somewhere in Burkina Faso, under a tree older than any nation, a little girl still held a red stone, now smooth from passing through so many hands. Years had passed since Obama's quiet visit to Burkina Faso, but the moment still pulsed through the global bloodstream. The Red Stone Initiative had become a continental force, expanding into education, infrastructure, and arts restoration, all without Western permission. What began with a whispered truth had blossomed into a cultural reclamation, where Africans wrote their own curriculum, named their own heroes, and honored their own timelines. It was never about isolation. It was about independence. And the world finally began to understand the difference. In a historic summit at Addis Ababa, Ibrahim Traoré addressed the African Union with no notes. His speech was raw, spoken in multiple native tongues. "Africa is not a continent of resources," he said. "It is a continent of memory, and memory is more powerful than gold." Midway through his address, he paused, reached into his pocket, and revealed a worn red stone. The room fell into reverent silence. This belonged to a girl who reminded a president who he was. And now, it belongs to the future. He placed it at the center of the room, not as a token, but as a seed. Meanwhile, Barack Obama, older now, more gray than black-haired, watched the live stream from a quiet library in Chicago. He had refused public office. He had declined think tanks. What he chose instead was mentorship. In community centers and late-night Zoom calls, he spoke with young leaders, not as an icon, but as a learner. "What I saw in Traoré," he once told them, "wasn't defiance. It was clarity. He knew who he was before the world tried to define him. And when I listened, I remembered who I was too." No applause. No spotlight. Just a soft nod from those who would lead next. One evening, under that same baobab tree where it all began, a gathering of children listened as the now-grown girl, the original keeper of the red stone, shared her story. Her voice was steady. "He cried and everything changed," she said. "Not because he was weak, but because he was finally strong enough to feel." She reached into her satchel and held up a new stone. Not red, but golden. "And now we build with this." Around her, the children cheered, not for history, but for the future. Because in the end, the real power wasn't in the stone. It was in the hands that dared to pass it on. If you made it this far, comment where you're watching from and let us know if the story of justice moved you.